I've always been a fairly private person, so when I finally found a perfect 1,500-acre piece of land to build my ranch, the fact that it sat completely outside the boundaries of any homeowners association was a massive selling point for me. The property was everything I had ever dreamed about. Rolling green hills stretched as far as the eye could see. A quiet stream wound its way through the fields. And the entire place offered the kind of peaceful seclusion most people only fantasize about. What I didn't fully understand at first, however, was one small detail involving a privately owned bridge. That bridge just so happened to be the only entrance and exit for a nearby upscale HOA neighborhood. A neat little bubble filled with perfect lawns, matching houses, and carefully maintained landscaping. And as it turned out, that bridge was sitting right on my newly purchased land. The problem started quietly, the way they usually do. One afternoon, a letter showed up in my mailbox. It politely suggested that my brand new ranch fence was, and I quote, not in keeping with the aesthetic standards of the surrounding community. Now, keep in mind, I live miles away from their actual neighborhood, but apparently my rustic wooden ranch fence was somehow offending their delicate design sensibilities from a distance. I shrugged it off and ignored it. Then another letter arrived. This time they complained about the noise coming from my cattle. It was completely ridiculous. I was operating a working ranch, not running a public library. Animals make noise. That's kind of the whole point. Things escalated when the HOA president herself decided to come pay me a visit. She drove her expensive luxury sedan as far down the paved road as she could, then walked the rest of the way up my gravel driveway, looking deeply unimpressed by what she clearly considered my lack of curb appeal. Without much introduction, she launched straight into a long speech. She explained that while I technically wasn't a member of their HOA, they still had certain expectations for the surrounding area. Apparently, they believed the entire valley should meet their standards. She even brought a list of suggestions. According to her, I should install a different style of fencing, plant a carefully selected row of sound-dampening trees, and generally redesign my ranch so it looked less like a working property and more like some kind of decorative English countryside garden. I listened patiently while she finished. Then I calmly told her that wasn't going to happen. My ranch was my home and my business. It wasn't their landscaping project. That's when they stopped pretending to be polite. The harassment started ramping up almost immediately. They began filing complaint after complaint with the county. They questioned my zoning permits. They challenged my water rights. They even filed reports about things that made absolutely no sense. Every single complaint forced me to respond officially, wasting hours of my time and costing me money in legal paperwork. Eventually, it became obvious what they were trying to do. They were hoping to bully me into giving in. Either I would comply with their ridiculous demands, or even better, I would get frustrated enough to sell the land to some developer they probably already had waiting. By that point, I was getting tired of the games. So, during one of my many trips to the county records office to fight another bogus complaint, I decided to dig deeper. If they wanted to make things difficult, I was going to make sure I understood every single detail about my property. I started pulling old documents, original deeds, survey maps, land records going back as far as possible. I spent an entire day inside that dusty office studying faded maps and tracing property lines that had been drawn generations ago. And that's when I found it. A tiny detail buried inside a document that was over 100 years old. A detail that changed everything. My property line didn't stop at the edge of the bridge like everyone assumed. According to the original survey, my land actually included the entire bridge structure itself. For decades, the residents of that pristine HOA community had been driving across it every day without ever realizing the truth. They assumed it was public infrastructure, but it wasn't. That bridge belonged to me, which meant I owned the only way in and out of their entire neighborhood. Sitting there in the quiet county office, I slowly leaned back in my chair as a smile spread across my face. The perfect solution to my HOA problem had been sitting right in front of me this whole time. I had never wanted to start a fight. All I ever wanted was to be left alone. But they had pushed and pushed until they finally crossed the line. Now it was time to push back. The next morning I made a phone call. I hired a local engineering company to perform a complete structural safety inspection on the bridge. Within a few hours, their trucks rolled onto property. They brought cranes, inspection equipment, and most importantly, several large professional signs printed in bold red letters. Those signs read, "Bridge closed, emergency structural repairs." They placed them right at the entrance. Just like that, the only road connecting the HOA community to the outside world was officially shut down. The trap was set. The chaos began almost immediately. I sat out on my porch with a fresh cup of coffee and watched the morning unfold. One by one, luxury cars drove up to the barricade. Each driver stopped, stared in confusion, and then turned around in frustration. Before long, my phone started ringing. It was the HOA president. Her voice sounded about 3 octaves higher than usual. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded. "You can't just close the bridge." I took another slow sip of coffee. "Actually," I replied calmly, "I can. It's my bridge on my property. As the owner, I'm responsible for making sure it's safe. This inspection might take some time. Weeks, maybe even months. Can't be too careful with old structures." She exploded with anger. Threats of lawsuits followed. She name-dropped every local official she could think of, but it was all meaningless. Legally speaking, the situation was crystal clear. It was private property, and I had every right to close it for safety reasons. At one point, the county sheriff even showed up, probably after she called him a dozen times. He looked at my property deed, glanced at the crowd of angry HOA residents gathering near the barricade, and simply shrugged. "Sorry, folks," he told them. "It's his bridge." For the next 2 weeks, the residents of that spotless HOA neighborhood were forced to use their only other option, an old, muddy logging road miles away from the main highway. Their shiny luxury vehicles quickly became covered in dirt. Deliveries were delayed. Appointments were missed. The inconvenience was enormous. And strangely enough, every single complaint they had filed against me with the county suddenly started disappearing, just like magic. Eventually, the HOA president requested another meeting. This time, she arrived without the attitude. She even brought the HOA's lawyer along. Both of them looked exhausted. They wanted to negotiate. I invited them to sit down and explain that I would be willing to grant their neighborhood a permanent easement, a legal right to use my bridge, for a price. And the price wasn't just money, although the financial payment was substantial enough to cover every dollar I had spent dealing with their nonsense. More importantly, the agreement included a legally binding contract. The HOA would permanently agree to stop filing complaints, stop interfering with my ranch, and stop harassing me in any way, forever. They absolutely hated it. You could see the anger on their faces, but they had no choice. They signed the documents. They paid the fee. And just like that, the emergency bridge repairs were completed. The next morning, the signs came down, and the bridge reopened. After that, the letters stopped arriving. The phone calls ended. The complaints vanished completely. Now I run my ranch in peace, exactly the way I always wanted. And every time I see one of their expensive cars driving across my bridge, I can't help but smile. Because sometimes the best fence you can build isn't made of wood or wire. It's a clear legal boundary, enforced when someone pushes you too far.